Have you ever thought that maybe, just maybe, the rich and powerful play by a totally different set of rules? Well, in the ancient world, they absolutely did, especially when it came to love and marriage. So today, we're diving into the wild and forbidden relationship rules that were only for the elite, stuff that would have been scandalous or even illegal for anybody else.
It's a pretty shocking question, right? But it gets right to the heart of what we're talking about. Because in a bunch of different ancient civilizations, this wasn't just allowed for rulers, sometimes it was actually required. And the reason why is way more complicated than you'd probably think.
I mean, just look at the contrast here. It's night and day. On one hand, you've got the average person who had to live by these super strict taboos. Find one partner, keep it simple. But on the other hand, the elites were in a completely different world. We're talking sibling marriage, huge harems. This was a fundamental split in how society worked.
So here's the most important thing to remember. None of this was about romance. Not at all. This was all about cold, hard, strategic power. These practices were tools designed to do very specific things. Keep the bloodline pure, hoard all the wealth inside one family, and make rulers seem like actual gods on earth, totally separate from the people they ruled. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off in Egypt to look at their famous royal incest. Then we'll see how the Inca and Hawaiians did something similar to claim they were divine. After that, we'll jump over to Greece for a look at elite education, and we'll wrap up with the ultimate power move, the massive imperial harem. Let's start with probably the most famous example of them all, ancient Egypt. For literally thousands of years, the pharaohs were doing something that was a huge no-no for everyone else.
So how did they get away with it? Well, the justification was divine. The story was that they were just doing what the gods did. Osiris and Isis were brother and sister, and also husband and wife. So by marrying their own sisters, pharaohs weren't just keeping the family line tight, they were acting out a sacred story, proving to everybody that, yep, they were descended from the gods.
And get this isn't some obscure piece of history. The most famous pharaoh of all time, King Tut, was the direct result of a brother-sister marriage. That's right, his parents were siblings. And while that shows you just how central this practice was, it also came at a pretty high cost. We know from genetic analysis that Tut likely had a ton of health problems because of all this inbreeding. It's a really stark physical reminder of what happens when you prioritize so-called purity over everything else.
So you can see this massive split, right? For the royal family, it was a strategy to hold on to power. But for literally everyone else, it was a huge taboo. This double standard wasn't an accident or a coincidence. It was the entire point. It was designed to create a gap between the rulers and the ruled that no one could ever hope to cross.
Okay, now let's see how this same pattern pops up somewhere else entirely. Turns out the Egyptians weren't the only ones with this idea. If we look at the Inca Empire and the Hawaiian royalty, we see the exact same logic, using these unions to basically create gods on earth.
Just look at this side by side. The Sapa Inca had to marry his sister because he was supposedly descended from the sun god Inti, and so only his sister was seen as pure enough to produce the next divine heir. Over in Hawaii, the high chiefs, the ali'i, did the same thing. They married their siblings to have kids who were considered aqua, which means near gods, with this incredible spiritual power called mana.
And in Hawaii, they even had a special name for this, a piau marriage. It wasn't just accepted, it was sacred. It was this calculated strategy where the higher the rank of the parents and the closer they were related, the more powerful and sacred their kid would be. This was literally breeding for divinity.
And no surprise here, for the average person in both of these societies, this was 100% forbidden. If a commoner tried this, they could actually be put to death. It was the ultimate elite privilege, a rule that only applied to those who claimed they were kin to the gods.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. We're going to move away from creating gods and divine bloodlines and talk about social power. And for that, we're heading to ancient Greece. Here, the exclusive practice was all about molding the next generation of elite men.
So in the upper crust of Greek society, especially in places like Athens, pederasty was this really established part of life. Now, this relationship between an older man and a teenage boy wasn't seen the way we would see it today at all. For them, it was framed as a key part of an elite education, a kind of mentorship for passing on wisdom and virtue and for building tight social bonds among the powerful men of the city.
And you have to understand, this was very much an elite thing. I mean, it was celebrated by famous thinkers like Plato. But more importantly, it required stuff that normal people just didn't have, like leisure time and a formal education. For the lower classes, it was way less common, and they often looked down on it. It was a status symbol.
Okay, for our final deep dive, let's look at something that spanned empires all across the ancient world, the massive royal harem. This wasn't just a lifestyle choice. This was statecraft on an absolutely epic scale.
Just let that number sink in. Thousands. That's the scale we're talking about. Chinese emperors had imperial harems with thousands of women inside. Ottoman sultans and Persian kings had hundreds and hundreds of wives and concubines. This was a scale of life that no regular person could even begin to imagine, let alone afford.
But a harem wasn't just a collection of wives. No, it was a political machine. A ruler would take a daughter from a rival king to lock in a political alliance. He'd marry the daughters of his own powerful nobles to make sure they stayed loyal to him. And, of course, with that many partners, he was guaranteed to have tons of potential heirs, securing his dynasty for generations.
So let's just pull this all together for a second. This chart lays it out perfectly. It doesn't matter if we're talking about sibling marriage in Egypt for bloodline purity, or in Hawaii to create divine status, or pederasty in Greece for elite social bonds, or massive harems for raw political power. The specific practice changed, but the goal was always the same: set the elite apart and lock in their power.
And that right there is the big takeaway. These strange, forbidden love rules were never random. They were a perfect mirror of a society's power structure. The rules you had to live by were all about where you stood on the social ladder.
Think about it. Back then, the rules were designed from the top down to concentrate power and create untouchable god kings. Today, thankfully, most of our societies are built around totally different ideas, values like equality and personal choice when it comes to who we love. It's a pretty powerful reminder of how far we've come.
Which kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. While all these ancient practices seem pretty extreme to us, it does make you wonder, what unspoken rules or norms in our own society today might be subtly reflecting the power structures that still exist? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.